My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to understand what was wrong with me. I grew up in a big house on the edge of Hartford. White columns, a paved driveway, a gardener who came twice a week. From the outside, it looked like a perfect childhood. Inside, it was anything but. My father, Richard Whitmore, built a logistics company, Whitmore Logistics, from nothing. Trucking, warehouses, contracts across half the state. He was proud of being a self-made man, and he expected his children to prove they deserved his last name. My mother died when I was 5. 2 years later, my father married Catherine, an elegant, cold woman who made it clear from day one that she already had a son and that he was now the center of this family. Tyler, my stepbrother, was a year older than me. He got a brand new car for his 16th birthday. I got a greeting card for mine. I'm not exaggerating when I say I felt invisible in that house. Not in any dramatic way. Nobody hit me. Nobody screamed. It was worse than that. I simply wasn't factored in. In family photos, I stood at the edge. At school events, by 17, I'd decided I wanted to study economics, business consulting. My father was indifferent. If you like counting other people's money, go for it. I got into a good university in Boston on a partial scholarship. The rest was supposed to come from the family. That was the promise, the same one that had always applied to Tyler. In my second year, the money stopped coming. I called my father. He was brief. "The company's going through a rough patch, Claire. Tyler's starting his MBA. That's the priority. You're smart. You'll figure it out." Tyler's graduate program, incidentally, cost enough to have covered my entire degree 3 times over. I worked 3 shifts a week, took out loans, slept 5 hours a night. By the end of my 3rd year, I knew I couldn't keep going. Not physically, emotionally. Every month, begging for help, I became that girl with the greeting card instead of the car all over again. I decided to leave school and start earning my own way, so I'd never have to ask anyone for anything again. When my father heard, he didn't try to talk me out of it. He just said, "Well, I guess it wasn't meant to be." Catherine said nothing at all. And Tyler, in passing, said something I'd remember for years. "Don't worry about it, Claire. Not everyone's meant to be useful to this family." I packed one bag. I had a little over $900 in my account. I stayed in Boston, the same city where I couldn't finish my degree, and decided I'd turn it into the city where I started over. Part 3. The Lies That Kept Us Apart. My father wasn't a cruel man in the usual sense. He never yelled, never raised a hand. Everything was subtler than that, and often it was Catherine's doing. I was 9 the first time something happened that would repeat itself for years. I found a draft of my father's speech for a business dinner on the kitchen table and, wanting to help, corrected a couple of typos in pencil. Carefully, proudly, feeling useful. When my father saw the corrections, he was annoyed. Not furious, just irritated. But the real storm came that evening, when Catherine, alone with him, added, "You know, Richard, I think she did that on purpose, to make you look foolish in front of your partners. Kids can be surprisingly spiteful sometimes." My father didn't speak to me for 3 days. I didn't understand why. When I was 12, I came home and overheard Catherine on the phone with a friend saying I was jealous of Tyler and quietly turning his father against him, even though I had never once said a bad word about my stepbrother in my life. A week later, my father canceled a trip he'd promised me to an out-of-state economics competition, with no real explanation. "If you can't behave properly with your brother, you're not going anywhere." The most painful incident happened when I was 15. Money I'd been saving for 6 months to buy Grandma Eleanor a birthday present went missing. Upset, I asked Catherine if she'd seen the envelope. The next day, my father called me into his study, his face like stone. "Catherine told me you accused her of stealing in front of the whole house. That's disgusting, accusing the woman who raised you." I tried to explain that I'd simply asked a question, that I hadn't accused anyone of anything, but my father had already decided whose side he was on. He didn't even look at me while he said it. The pattern was always the same. Some small, harmless moment, And by the next day, retold by Catherine, it had turned into something that made me look ungrateful, cruel, or dishonest. For a long time, I didn't understand why she did it. It wasn't until I was older that it clicked. As long as my father was annoyed with me, as long as he saw me as the difficult one, it was easier for him not to spend time, attention, or money on me. All of that went to Tyler instead, and Catherine made sure it stayed that way. I never told Grandma Eleanor about any of this directly. I felt ashamed, like there was something in these stories that was somehow my own fault. Only once, at 16, did I let it slip. The incident with the missing money. My grandmother was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "Claire, remember this. If you're being blamed for something you didn't do, and no one around you wants to actually find out the truth, that doesn't mean you're guilty. It means it's convenient for someone else if you are." I didn't fully understand those words back then. I understood them much later. I remember my first 6 months in Boston as one long fog of exhaustion. I shared an apartment with 3 other women, slept on an air mattress, worked as a receptionist at a small law firm by day, and waited tables at night. Sometimes, closing up the restaurant at 1 in the morning, I'd sit down on the curb at the bus stop and think, how did I end up here when I grew up in a house with a pool? But there was something freeing about it too. For the first time in my life, no one was comparing me to Tyler. No one was deciding whether I deserved attention. My successes, even the small ones, belonged to me and no one else. At the law firm, I quickly realized I wasn't interested in the law itself, but in how my employers' businesses worked, how they found clients, tracked expenses, negotiated deals. I started offering the partners small ideas for free, how to streamline their scheduling, how to build a clearer system for tracking billable hours. The ideas worked. One of the partners, Mr. Hodges, told me one day, "Claire, you shouldn't be working the front desk. You've got the mind of an analyst." Those words felt strange to hear and unbelievably warm. For the first time in years, someone was judging me by what I actually did, not by my last name. A year later, I moved on to work as a personal assistant for the owner of a small consulting firm, Cynthia Hale. Cynthia was sharp, demanding, and had zero patience for excuses, but she's where I got my real education in business. I built reports, prepared client presentations, sat in the corner of negotiation rooms taking notes. Cynthia never held back when I did something wrong, and I was grateful for that. For the first time, criticism wasn't meant to put me down, it was meant to make me better. In the evenings, I kept teaching myself, finishing online courses in financial analysis, reading books on strategic consulting, working through case studies of major companies. I still didn't have a degree, but I had more and more knowledge. I called my grandmother Eleanor every Sunday. She never asked when I was coming home, she asked what I'd learned that week. Once I admitted to her, "Grandma, sometimes I'm scared I'm just wasting my time, that without a degree, without a family behind me, none of this will amount to anything." She answered calmly, "Claire, a degree opens doors. But what happens once you're through the door? That's all you. You have something a lot of people with degrees don't. You know how to work when no one's watching." I didn't know then that those Sunday calls were some of the last warm conversations I'd ever have with that woman. Part 5. A Letter from Grandma Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor died quietly, in her sleep, when I was 26. I found out from a neighbor. My father didn't even call, he texted, "Funeral Saturday, come if you want." I went. At the funeral, Catherine was politely distant, Tyler was on the phone right next to the grave, and my father gave a short speech about a wonderful woman, even though I'd never once seen him visit her unless he had no other choice. 2 weeks after the funeral, my grandmother's attorney called, Mr. Hennessy, an older man with a gentle voice. He asked me to come to his office alone, without the rest of the family. It turned out that years earlier, Grandma Eleanor had quietly opened a small investment account in my name, without telling my father or anyone else in the family. She'd started with a modest amount, but between smart long-term investments and compound interest, the account had grown into something that, by the standards of my life at the time, felt like an entire fortune. Not millions, but enough that, for the first time, I didn't have to work 3 jobs at once. There was a letter with it. I read it in my car, in the parking lot outside the office, and I cried harder than I had in years. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably tired of fighting this alone. I've seen who you've become: strong, stubborn, kind, no matter what. Your father and Catherine never gave you what you deserved, and I couldn't fix that while I was alive without tearing apart the little that held this family together. But I could leave you this. Not an inheritance in the usual sense, but a tool. What you do with it is entirely up to you. I believe in you, sweetheart. You never owed anyone proof of your worth, but if you want to show them anyway, show them the only way you know how, through what you do, not what you say. I sat in that car for a very long time. Then I pulled out a notebook and started writing a business plan. I named the company Hawthorne Consulting, after the hawthorn shrub, which grows in the poorest, rockiest soil and still manages to bloom every spring. I liked that idea. It doesn't matter what ground you're planted in, you can still bloom there. I started alone, out of a rented studio, with one laptop and a list of contacts I'd built over years of working for Cynthia Hale. My first clients were small family businesses: a laundromat, a coffee chain, an auto shop. I analyzed their spending, helped streamline their logistics, optimized their purchasing. I worked for free the first month with every client. Prove to yourself I'm worth trusting, then pay me, I'd say. It worked. People trust someone who shows results first and asks for money later. When Cynthia found out I was starting my own firm, she wasn't offended, quite the opposite. She gave me my first 2 serious contacts and said, "Finally, I've been waiting 3 years for this." The first 2 years were brutal. I worked 14-hour days, did my own bookkeeping, drove to every meeting myself, drafted my own contracts with legal guidance from Mr. Hennessy, who'd become almost a second grandfather to me. But every month, I had more clients. Within 3 years, I had 8 employees and an office in downtown Boston. Small, but real. I told my family nothing. Not my father, not Catherine, not Tyler. We barely spoke. Occasional, brief, formal birthday calls. My father seemed to assume I was still getting by somewhere. That suited me fine. I didn't need his approval. I needed to build something real. Part 7. The Client. By the time I turned 30, Hawthorne Consulting had specialized in logistics and supply chains. The exact thing I understood best, thanks to years spent, even at a distance, in the shadow of my father's business. We worked with manufacturers, transport companies, distribution centers. Our reputation grew, not because of a big name, but because of results. The clients we worked with consistently cut costs and grew profits. That's when, at an industry conference in Chicago, a man named Kevin Murphy approached me, the operations director of a company that had been bleeding money for years due to inefficient logistics. He described his problems, and I sketched 3 ideas on a napkin for how to fix them. A week later, his company signed a contract with Hawthorne. The company was called Whitmore Logistics. If Claire's story has you hooked so far, hit subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. We post stories like this one all the time. Part 8. A Secret Partnership. I won't pretend I wasn't shocked when Kevin said the company's name. For a few seconds, I sat there in silence, remembering the house with the columns, the greeting card instead of a car, Tyler's words about being useful. Then I thought of Grandma Eleanor and her words. Show them the only way you know how, through what you do. I decided not to reveal that Richard Whitmore was my father. On paper, I only ever dealt with the company's hired managers. My father, having stepped back from day-to-day operations, rarely showed up, leaving those decisions to Kevin and the board. I ran everything through Hawthorne Consulting like any other contractor, professionally, with no name attached that might explain anything. The work was massive in scope. For years, my father's company had been losing money to outdated delivery routes, inefficient warehouse processes, and scattered carrier contracts. I rebuilt the logistics system from scratch, redrew delivery routes, introduced a unified shipment tracking system, renegotiated fuel and maintenance contracts. In the first year after our changes went live, the company's operating profit rose by nearly a third. By year 2, Hawthorne Consulting was officially responsible for roughly 40% of Whitmore Logistics' operating profit. According to Kevin, my father was thrilled with this consulting firm and asked several times to personally meet Hawthorne's leadership to say thank you. I found a reason to decline every single time, sending our senior partner, Ethan Brooks, in my place. He was the only person at the company who knew the whole story and guarded my silence faithfully. Was it revenge? I've spent a long time asking myself that question. No, I don't think it was. Not exactly. I never plotted to destroy my father's business or humiliate him. I was just doing my job, the best work I was capable of, and the fact that, without announcing it, I was propping up the company of a man who'd once decided I wasn't useful. That was a bittersweet coincidence only I knew about. All those years, I was quietly building my own life alongside it. I started seeing a therapist, once a month at first, then once a week, to work through whatever was left in me from that girl with the greeting card instead of the car. I made close friends who had nothing to do with the Whitmore family or the business. I bought a small apartment with a harbor view, the first property I'd ever purchased entirely with my own money. Some evenings, I'd stand at the window and think, if only Grandma could see this. I never planned to announce anything to anyone. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Live my life, build my business, and let my father go on never knowing who was actually keeping his company afloat. It felt fair to me. He hadn't noticed me when I needed him. I didn't need him to notice me now. But life, it turned out, had other plans. When I turned 34, I received a formal invitation, a heavy cream envelope with gold lettering, to a gala celebrating Richard Whitmore's retirement. The company was handing control to a new CEO. My father, according to the letter, was capping off a 40-year journey building a great family empire. I wasn't invited as his daughter. Formally, I was invited as a co-owner of partner firm Hawthorne Consulting. Kevin, while arranging the venue, had insisted that leadership from every key partner attend, and, not knowing the full story, added my name to the list. I spent a long time deciding whether to go. Ethan Brooks suggested I send someone else from the team instead. Claire, you don't have to go. You don't owe this family anything. My therapist, Dr. Foster, who I'd been seeing for almost 4 years by then, asked me directly, "What do you actually want, if you take resentment and the need to prove something out of the equation?" I sat with that question for a week, and I realized I wanted to go. Not for revenge, not for recognition. I wanted to close this chapter of my life for good, to see these people one last time, not as the frightened girl with $900 in a duffel bag, but as the woman who'd built herself from scratch. After that night, I wanted to walk out of their lives for good, calmly, with nothing left unsettled inside me. I bought a sharp navy dress, pulled my hair back, and brought Ethan Brooks along as the firm's formal representative. We agreed. If anyone asked who owned Hawthorne, Ethan would politely change the subject. I wasn't ready for a conversation with my father, but I was ready to simply stand in the same room as him, knowing something he didn't. I had no idea the night would end nothing like I'd planned. The ballroom was enormous, crystal chandeliers, a live quartet, tables dressed with white orchids. Over 200 guests, company partners, old friends of my father's, local politicians, business journalists. Catherine, in a burgundy gown, greeted guests at the entrance with her usual icy smile. Tyler, heavier now and thinning at the temples, was deep in conversation with a group of men in suits. Apparently, he now held some kind of leadership role at the company. My father had aged. His hair had gone fully gray, his walk had slowed. But his voice, when he stepped onto the stage for his speech, sounded just as confident as I remembered from childhood. He spoke for a long time, about starting with a single truck, building the company with his own hands, how proud he was to be leaving behind a real empire. At some point, he turned to the subject of family. My wife, Catherine, has supported me through all of it. My son, Tyler, will carry on my life's work. He paused, scanned the room, and suddenly saw me, standing against the wall next to Ethan. Something shifted in his face. Maybe the alcohol, maybe some old, never-spoken resentment over me abandoning the family years ago. I don't know. But he suddenly said, seemingly to me, but loud enough for all 200 guests to hear, "And there's my daughter Claire. She actually came. You know, there was a time I hoped she'd be part of all this. But, well, some people just aren't built to be useful. Claire chose," he smirked, "her own path. Well, I hope things are going well for her, wherever it is she works." A soft, uncomfortable laugh rippled through the room. Some people missed the irony, others caught it exactly. Catherine smiled slightly into her champagne glass. Tyler didn't even look up from his phone. I stood there against the wall and, to my own surprise, didn't feel what I expected to feel. No pain, no humiliation, no childhood hurt. I felt calm. Absolute, ice-cold calm. The calm of someone finally seeing a thing exactly as it is, with no illusions left. I walked up toward the stage, unhurried, steady. My father seemed to expect me to start defending myself or to cry the way I used to as a kid. Instead, I said, calmly, loud enough for the nearest rows to hear, "Thank you for the invitation, Dad. It was interesting to see this one last time." Then I turned to Ethan and said evenly, without any drama, "Ethan, first thing tomorrow morning, send Kevin Murphy formal notice terminating Hawthorne Consulting's contract with Whitmore Logistics. We'll settle every current obligation properly. There won't be any further partnership." The room went completely silent. A few guests near us, who knew about the partnership firsthand, started whispering. My father, still not fully grasping what was happening, frowned. "Claire, what are you even—" I didn't explain anything. I took Ethan's arm and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a room full of murmurs and my father's face, for the first time in years, showing something other than indifference. Genuine, bewildered confusion. The truth reached Richard Whitmore the next morning, not from me, but from Kevin Murphy, whom Ethan, as agreed, had sent the official termination notice. Kevin, naturally, called my father immediately. The news was too serious to sit on. Hawthorne Consulting, which generated 40% of the company's operating profit, was walking away. As Ethan told me afterward, he kept fielding panicked calls from Whitmore Logistics employees for a while, though he never commented on any of it. My father couldn't believe that this small consulting firm belonged to his daughter. He asked Kevin to pull the paperwork, trace the company's registration history, find out anything about who owned it. 2 days later, the calls started. First, my father, I didn't pick up. Then Catherine, no answer either. Then Tyler sent a long text starting with, "Claire, we need to talk. This affects the whole family," which, notably, didn't contain a single word of apology, just anxiety about the company's future. I didn't respond to anyone for 3 weeks. Not out of a desire to hurt them, I genuinely had nothing left to say. Whatever I needed to say to that family, I'd already said it on that stage. The company started struggling almost immediately. Without Hawthorne's optimized routes and contracts, the logistics reverted to their old inefficiencies. Several major clients, used to fast, precise deliveries, started leaving for competitors. A month after the gala, the first business press article ran with a headline about the sudden departure of a key partner from Whitmore Logistics. The company's privately traded shares began falling sharply. That's when, for the first time in years, my father showed up at my office in Boston in person, unannounced. He looked older, shaken, nothing like the confident man who'd given that speech on stage a month earlier. "Claire," he said, I really didn't realize it was you this whole time." He talked about the company, about how urgent the situation was, about an upcoming board meeting the following week. Not once in the entire conversation did he ask how I'd spent these years, or say he was sorry for what he said on that stage, or ask anything at all about my life. The entire conversation circled back to one thing: could I bring the contract back? I listened to him quietly for a few minutes. Then I said something that had probably been building in me for 18 years. "Dad, You didn't come here because you remembered you have a daughter. You came because you need my company. Those are two different things, and I'm not willing to confuse them anymore." He tried to argue, said I was being unfair, that family was family. I answered calmly, "Family isn't something you only remember when you need money. You knew exactly where to find me for 18 years. You never looked." Then I asked him to leave. The following months turned into a string of desperate attempts by the Whitmore family to get my attention again. Not to bring me back into the family this time, but to save the business. Catherine, who had never once called me without an urgent reason, started sending long messages about how hard this is on your father and how important it is to preserve the family legacy for future generations. Tyler, who hadn't shown interest in my life in years, suddenly suggested meeting just to talk, no business involved, and then opened the conversation by bringing up the board meeting and the falling stock price. My father tried different approaches. First, apologies, formal, clearly coached by lawyers. Then, an offer to buy a stake in Hawthorne Consulting to come in as a partner. Then, an attempt to apply pressure through mutual contacts through Mr. Hennessy, who by then handled only my affairs and politely but firmly refused to act as a go-between. There was one attempt that hurt more than the rest. My father, through his lawyers, opened a conversation about possibly contesting Grandma Eleanor's estate, implying that since I'd gained an unfair advantage through a hidden account, the family had grounds to challenge it in court. When Mr. Hennessy found out, he called me personally. "Claire, the paperwork is airtight. Your grandmother's intentions were completely clear and fully protected under the law. Don't worry, but I wanted you to know exactly what your father is willing to do." That moment, not the scene at the retirement party, not the conversation in my office, was the one that truly closed things for me. Not the company's anger, not the falling stock price, but my father's willingness, after everything, to try to take away the one good thing I had left, just to protect his own interests. I never sued them, never made any public statements, never gave interviews, even though journalists reached out to me a few times after articles started calling me the mystery heiress of Whitmore Logistics. I simply kept living my life, working, growing Hawthorne Consulting with new, far more appreciative clients, seeing Dr. Foster, taking walks along the waterfront in the evenings. Meanwhile, my father's company kept losing ground. 6 months after the contract ended, Whitmore Logistics announced layoffs affecting nearly a third of its staff. A few months after that, word got out that the company was looking for an investor to buy a controlling stake. My father was, in effect, losing control of the thing he'd built his entire life around. Tyler, lacking both the experience and the instincts his father had, couldn't hold the company together. I felt no satisfaction hearing about it. Just sadness. Not for my father, but for what things could have been, if just once, even once, he had chosen me the way he'd always chosen his business. Almost 2 years have passed since that retirement party. Whitmore Logistics was eventually sold to a larger competitor, under a new name, with new leadership. The Whitmore name disappeared from the building my father once built with his own hands. My father, from what mutual acquaintances tell me, lives quietly now, rarely appearing in public. Tyler moved to another state and, from what I hear, works as a mid-level manager somewhere with no connection to logistics. Catherine occasionally sends Christmas cards. I don't open them. I don't hate them anymore. Months and months of work with Dr. Foster helped me understand something important. My worth was never dependent on whether my father saw it. It was in me the whole time, in my ability to get back up after falling, in my capacity to build something real out of almost nothing, in my right to say no once and for all without ever having to justify it. Today, Hawthorne Consulting is a stable, respected firm with more than 40 employees, offices in 2 cities, and a reputation built not on anyone else's name, but on real results. I work with clients who see me as a partner, not as some useful or useless member of a family. On weekends, I go to galleries, spend time at the coast, meet up with friends who know me not as Richard Whitmore's daughter, but simply as Claire. Sometimes, in the evenings, I think about Grandma Eleanor and her words. One day you won't need to prove your right to be in the room. You'll just know you have it. That day came. Not on the stage that night, not the moment the contract ended, but much more quietly. One morning I woke up and realized that, for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what my father would say or think about me. I was just living my life. If there's one lesson to take from all of this, it's this. Your worth is not defined by the opinion of people who refuse to see it, even when those people are your own parents. Real success, real dignity, isn't built on diplomas or family approval. It's built quietly, one decision at a time, made when no one's watching, and with the steadiness to one day say, no more.